In this video, we'll go through the best settings for photography and video on the Sony a6000. So let's start with settings for videos. The first thing you want to start with is making sure that you're using the right format video settings. And the highest quality format that you can get on the Sony a6000 is a6000. If this is grayed out on your menu, it's because you need a certain type of memory card, which is called an SDXC memory card, which are about as widely available as any other type of memory card. By using this format setting, you'll get the best quality video possible from your Sony a6000. To change this, you go to Camera Settings, Tab 1, File Format. Then you can also change the record setting to either 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. 30 frames per second is great for most situations like this, but if you want a bit more like B-roll or you want to slow down your footage a bit and it still looks smoother, you can go for 60 frames per second. So that is worth bearing in mind for when you're making videos with this camera. You can change this under Camera Settings, Tab 2, Record Settings. 60p equals 60 frames per second, 30p equals 30 frames per second. So the Sony a6000 does lack proper picture profiles such as Cine 4 and S-Log, which you may have heard of. Now this is a bit of a drawback to this camera because they are very professional looking picture profiles which you would expect from newer cameras. But as this is an older camera, I guess it's understandable that that type of thing isn't included. However, there are a few settings that you can change to help make your footage look as cinematic as possible. The settings I personally use is that I use the portrait creative style. I even use this on videos for more landscape type things. I just like the kind of effect that this setting gives your videos. And you can change this under Camera Settings, Tab 4, Creative Style, and scroll down to Portrait. Then I adjust these further, so while you're on this setting, press right while Portrait is still selected and change the contrast to -3, saturation to -1, and sharpness to -1. These settings will give your videos a smooth quality, but without removing too much sharpness or detail. I've used these settings for most of my videos on the Sony a6000, and I'm pretty happy with the results. Another thing you can do to make sure you're not losing too much sharpness from your videos is that you can turn the soft skin effect off. This is basically for taking selfies and stuff like that, and it will kind of soften your skin up. However, for most of the time, I think this effect is far too drastic, and it certainly has a negative effect on landscape kind of videos or anything where you're not including a person, and I never even have it on for when I'm recording myself. For me, I just don't think it's that effective. You can turn this off on Camera Settings, and then it's on Tab 6. Another settings worth making sure are turned on to improve your videos is to make sure that you have steady shot on. Now, if you're just filming on a tripod, this isn't quite as important, but if you're recording handheld, out and about, you want your shots to look as steady as possible and not to be shaking around too much. Now, you do need to make sure you're using a lens that has OSS steady shot built in, so if you're using the kit lens, you're fine with that, but you just check what lens you are using that definitely has this feature, as your videos will be quite shaky without it. So you turn this on Camera Settings, Tab 7, and then Steady Shot. Also, I find keeping the white balance on this camera on auto most of the time works absolutely fine for me. I find it balances the colour pretty well, whether that's indoor or outdoors, in dark situations or light situations. I find the auto white balance generally does a good job, and it's one less thing to worry about. But if you want to check that out and try some other settings, it's on Camera Settings and then Tab 4. So I do think these settings will help the videos on your Sony a6000 look as professional and cinematic as possible. But now let's look at some quick settings that you can change to improve your photography. Now, of course, photography settings change an awful lot depending on the type of shooting you're doing. Say you're doing a landscape or you're doing a portrait, the type of settings that you're going to need to apply to get the best of these situations is quite different. But we'll run through some quick things that you can do now and try and remember, so you can help yourself along the way while taking photos. So if you're taking portraits, I'd make sure that you have your aperture as wide open as possible. This is represented by the F number and is easiest to access using the aperture priority mode on the top function wheel. Now, the widest aperture is the lowest number. So if you're using the kit lens, the widest this can go is f3.5. However, there are many other lenses on the market which have a much lower f number so that their aperture is even wider. Why this looks good for portraits is that it gives you that nice blurry background effect, and it keeps the main focus of your composition, the person you're taking a photo of, as the main feature. Everything else is blurring into the background. I think it gives everything a very professional looking edge. It's also worth bearing in mind that you can use wide aperture to get this effect when taking photos of anything basically. I think compared to phone cameras especially, this is a massive advantage of cameras such as the Sony a6000, where a phone camera just can't get that type of effect naturally. If you see a phone camera photo that has taken a photo like that, it will have added it on afterwards. It's not actually being done by the camera's lens itself. So that is a great tip for getting started with portraits. If you want a more in-depth video looking at settings for portraits, you can check out this video here, which I have made all about that. And when you're taking portraits, I would recommend using the focus mode AFS, which is for autofocus single shot. Here you can half press the shutter, and that will help get your photo ready to take a photo just for a single shot. There are other autofocus modes that work better if your subject is moving around, but for portraits, your subject will generally be quite still, so AFS is your best option for that. You can find this option in the menus under Camera Settings and then Focus Mode. Now for landscape photography, I like to use the lowest ISO possible. ISO adds artificial light to your shots to brighten them up in darker situations. The payoff for this is that it will add noise to your photos, which will add a grainy effect. Now for landscapes in particular, I think you want to be able to see as much detail as possible so that noise won't be appreciated. Most of the time when you're taking landscapes, you're going to be out in daylight, so you don't really need that extra lightening up of your images anyway. So I like to keep my ISO on 100 when taking landscapes, just so that I know my shots will be as clear as possible. You can change your ISO on the Sony a6000 just by pressing right on the function wheel, or it's also under Camera Settings and then tab 4. Also for landscapes, I like to change the focus area settings depending on the type of shot that you are taking. So if your landscape has an obvious focus point, say a boat in a lake or a tree, something like that for example, you can change your focus area to spot focus, which means you're selecting in advance the part of your composition you definitely want to have in focus. This works great just to tell the camera that that is exactly where your point of focus is going to be. The setting I use for this is Flexible Spot Large. However, if your landscape has no particular point of focus, it's just a wide landscape where you want to look at everything clearly, I use the option Wide, which keeps as much of your composition in focus as possible. You can change this setting under Camera Settings, tab 3, and then Focus Area. These settings will give you a good footing for both photos and videos using the Sony a6000. Are there any different settings that you use with your Sony a6000? Let me know in the comments below. But if you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. But until next time, see ya!